Hello, everyone. I'm George Atchison, Communications Director at the Gevirtz School of Education at UC Santa Barbara. On behalf of UC Santa Barbara and everybody at the Gevirtz School, we're pleased to welcome you to the second of our three-part How to Homeschool webinar series. Through this series, the Gevirtz School's faculty experts will share research-based practical tips and strategies to help you address the educational, family, and mental health challenges presented by the pandemic situation we're all experiencing. Today's talk by Dr. Maryam Kia-Keating is titled Family Resilience in Stressful and Uncertain Times. Before I introduce Dr. Kia-Keating, I want to take a second to mention some Zoom tips and thank the collaborators that partnered with the Gevirtz School to put this webinar on. And then I'll warm you up with a quick and easy interactive poll. So here's some Zoom tips. If you hover your cursor over the bottom of your Zoom screen, you should see a few buttons along the toolbar. If you want to listen to this webinar in Spanish, click on the interpretation button. That button looks like a little globe and select Spanish. If you have any questions during the talk, the best way to ask them is by clicking on the chat button at the bottom of your screen. Dr. Kia-Keating will answer as many questions as possible at the end of her talk. Clicking the chat button opens up a chat box. This is the public spot to make comments or chat with other participants during the talk. Please be sure to share your comments with all participants. There's two choices, so do all panelists and attendees. Needless to say, putting on a webinar is quite a production, so we would like to thank all our co-producers. The Gevirtz School would like to thank UCSB's Alumni Affairs and Graduate Division for their help getting this series off the ground. We'd like to thank the Regional Development Team and Institutional Advancement for their help planning and managing this Zoom event. Finally, we'd like to thank our friends, alumni, and colleagues in the community and surrounding school districts for sharing this webinar series broadly. This series is for the community, and we appreciate you spreading the word. Okay, I'm going to ask you to get engaged by answering an interactive poll question. Since this is our second talk, we were wondering, and the answers are anonymous, so don't worry about that. How many of you took part in Dr. Jason Duquesne's, this is the other poll question. Let's ask this poll question. Which one of these phrases describes you best? Are you a parent, grandparent, caretaker, educational professional, student, other? And then also, what are your children's ages? There's a bunch of breakdowns for that. And then the third question, which is a simple yes or no. Did you attend Dr. Jason Duquesne's discussion last week? So if you could answer those, you'll see it's pretty easy to do. And we'll give you 20 seconds to think about this, since you have 3 questions. I'm on it. Don't forget, you will need to slide through and see all these things, all 3 questions. Okay, we've got, the numbers are sort of matching up. Some of you don't want to take part in the poll. So as we can see, we've got the results here. We've got a lot of parents today. We've got a lot of parents of elementary school students. And it's almost 50-50 people who attended or didn't attend. Interesting to see. All right. So thank you for your response. That will certainly help Dr. Kia-Keating focus her presentation even more. Let me tell you about who you're about to meet. Maryam Kia-Keating is an associate professor of clinical psychology in the Department of Counseling, Clinical, and School Psychology, and is also a licensed clinical psychologist. She received her AB from Dartmouth College, her education master's from Harvard University in risk and prevention, and a PhD from Boston University in clinical psychology. Dr. Kia-Keating has received specialized training in child traumatic stress in her work with the Childhood Violent Trauma Center at the Yale Child Study Center and the Center for Refugee Trauma at the Children's Hospital, Harvard Medical Center, Boston. Kia-Keating's research has been funded by the NICHD, NIMH, and NIAAA. She focuses her work around coping and resilience in the context of experiences of trauma, stress, and adversity, particularly for ethnic minority and other vulnerable and or understudied populations, including refugees and immigrants. With that, I will turn it over to Dr. Kia-Keating Thanks, Maryam. The Zoom is all yours.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much, George, for that lovely introduction. And thank you all for spending the time today with us, especially and perhaps because of all the turbulence and pain and suffering going on around us. I'm appreciative that you're thinking about your family's resilience with me in these uncertain and stressful times. So for today, I wanted to invite you to really participate. Even though I am going to be speaking for a little while, I'm going to ask you and invite you to really try to be participatory in this conversation. We'll use the chat and get used to this virtual world of ours in doing so. And I would invite you to also have a piece of paper handy so that you can take some notes, and perhaps through this I'll offer you some ideas, but also try to make this pragmatic so that you walk away with some inspiration as we all move ahead in the future. I wanted to also just for a moment thank all of the organizers, all of these people behind the scenes who had this vision and brought it to fruition. There's so many to thank. Obviously, George, I already thanked, and John and Liz and Kelly and JR and Waid and Aline and Viola. And of course, our Dean Jeff Milam. So I thank you all for the invitation to speak today. So my intention today is to offer some thoughts and some concrete ways to tend to and to build your family's resilience, and really to inspire you to be intentional about the direction that you want to go starting today. As I said at the beginning, I have to acknowledge the devastation and pain of our recent days in our country. And in the past few months, of course, we've been on quite a roller coaster ride. I know we're in the midst of a crisis right now, and so it's almost not easy to stop and have this pause today to perhaps we're barely feeling ready to talk about resilience, but in many ways it's perhaps more relevant than ever. And I appreciate your time and your vision for seeing that even if you can't do all of it, which certainly you wouldn't be able to today, taking this very first step is a good place to start. We're going to talk about really building a strong foundation for yourself and your family. And for now, I'm going to share some slides with you just to have some visuals along the way. And you already know the name of my talk here, but let me just make this bigger as I speak. But for now, we'll really be taking it one day at a time. And so I don't want you to feel, take these notes and have these ideas. I'm going to be drawing from research-based strategies to start building that foundation of resilience. But I also recognize that in this small space of time, we're only just getting the conversation started. I won't be able to cover everything. I would like to continue this conversation, and I'm willing to continue this conversation after today, and we'll talk about that a little bit at the end. But do write your questions in on the chat and your ideas on the chat as we go forward, and we can share in this space together and as a community. And I also want to just put in the caveat that I'm a mom too. I have 2 elementary school aged children, ages 7 and 9. And so I'm dealing with the same struggles and the same stressors that many of you are. And as a psychologist and a researcher and a professor, I'm not the holder of all answers, but I can certainly try to hold up this torch for you to pass it on as a light that guides you. And really, ultimately, you being here are going to hold that torch up for yourself and your family, so that when we face these times of darkness, as we are right now, it's okay to experience this as a transition and a turbulent time and not do everything perfectly, and perhaps even see in all of these imperfections that are happening, these trials and errors, this time of great reflection for ourselves, our families, our communities, even our country, and even some of the loss that is happening. That maybe some of this, we're going to see some of the key ingredients for growth and transformation to come. So while I want to spend most of my time talking about resilience, of course, and that's the title of the talk, and I promise we're going to go there, I can't not acknowledge the stress and the challenges that have only seemed to increase in the past few months. So I want to take a moment to reflect, and I wondered if you could all join me in that. So in the chat, could you write for a moment a challenge that you and your family have faced during this period? And we can share together in seeing what kinds of experiences people are relaying. And George, do I need to stop share for us to be able to see the chat? Let's see, perhaps.
No, you should just, if you just hit chat, it should show up on the left there.
Okay.
On the right. Sorry.
Anyway, it was easier to see. I'm getting used to all of these virtual ways. So we have worries about long distance family and isolation from friends and extended family. Impending layoffs, economic hardship is certainly something. Moving from one income to two, or from two incomes to one perhaps, working from home while watching a kid and missing your family, homeschooling while working. Spending so much time together can actually be a stressor. Many of these kinds of difficulties, worries about how our children will get through without any emotional damage, lack of motivation from children, and separations from family and friends. Thank you all for sharing these. Depression and anxiety about the future. I think that when we share this, it helps us to feel this sense of community that we really do have with one another, and this interconnection. We're all really going through all of these things, and they're all coming in as a tidal wave all at once. So it's helpful to know that we're this community, and we know from research on depletion that these kinds of successive stressors can actually deplete you faster. So in other words, this is what psychologists call a heavier load. You start actually losing your ability to control your emotions, your ability to stick to a difficult task, your self-control, and even your willpower in avoiding things that you know are unhealthy, like unhealthy activities. So in other words, it's kind of like carrying a heavy pack. So if we carried a heavy pack on our shoulders and we were going for a long walk, we know that it's pretty obvious we would eventually get tired and need to sit down and rest. But it's more than that. It actually affects your frustration level. So if anybody's ever been hot and sweaty and you're carrying something heavy and somebody asks you a question and you're like, what do you want, right? We lose that ability to be patient and to respond with the patience and kindness that we might normally be able to muster up. We might be more irritable, more easily frustrated with our children or our partners. We might have a harder time concentrating on tasks that we need to get done. And even our habits might be affected. So that we might be choosing things that are less healthy choices. And so back to the slides for a moment, I'm just showing you sort of that low battery warning, right, that we get on our phones is something we need to pay attention to ourselves around our own low battery warnings. So when you're depleted, just like a low battery on your phone or your iPad or whatever machine you're using right now to tune in, you need that time to recharge. And then on top of that load that we all are carrying on our packs from all of the stress and uncertainty that we're experiencing right now, we're all experiencing a great deal of fear and anxiety and uncertainty. So over the past few months, obviously, that anxiety has been extreme and it's been happening at the global level. And we've really been multiple times, if not chronically, in crisis mode. And that makes us reactive instead of proactive, right? We have to respond to the new crisis of the moment, the new situation, and what we're fearing is going to come. And our responses fluctuate. I've been talking to a lot of people who tell me about the roller coaster ride that they feel like they are going on, even sometimes on a daily basis, even sometimes on an hourly basis. And when we look at disaster research, so research that studies people after disasters, we see that there's those fluctuations over time, but it's not just a linear path towards a bad crisis and then things get better eventually, slowly. Instead, they do go up and down. And this is something that we can expect in terms of the lows when people are experiencing shock and fear and grief. But then there's these honeymoon phases where times that seem especially good. And it doesn't mean that that's going to last either, unfortunately. There's still ups and downs that we go through over time. And especially, you all mentioned some of these experiences around economic hardship or disruptions to education, your children's lack of motivation. And some of that may affect you now, and some of it may come up later in the long term. So these are things that are adding to our load during this time. And finally, I wanted to point out that researchers have done some really interesting research around what does it mean when we have this extra load on, and in addition, like a sense of fear in our environment. And I think this research on rats is actually quite compelling. So here's a cute kitty, but the research on rats was with scientists where they had young rats who were very, very playful and very happy. Well, happy, we couldn't ask them, but they were very playful. And these rats actually had never met a cat before. They didn't even know about cats. The researchers took one cat hair, a single cat hair, and they stuck it in the cage with the rats. And the rats stopped playing entirely. So then they thought, well, what'll happen next? What if we remove that cat hair? Okay, we know that fear stops play, right? Stops that joy and that sense of innocence and happiness. And they remove the cat hair, and the rats never go back to the same level of play and activity that they once had. So that's a little bit sobering if we use that as a metaphor for the cat hair, or actually we have like an entire cat in the cage with us if we were afraid of these. This was a really cute cat, so hopefully nobody's scared. But if we think of that as our metaphor for what's going on around us, right? So it makes you think and stop and think about our children and how this cat hair or all of the stressors, because it's really not just been a single hair, is impacting our children's learning, their emotions, and their behaviors in profound ways. But there I want to stop and shift over to thinking about the positive and the potential here. Because even though there might be lifelong change involved in some of what we're going through today, there's also this possibility of a positive lifelong change, right? A transformation, something difficult that we have to go through, but whether it's possible for us and our children to open up a new door and to find something important and meaningful and connected on the other side. So I want to take a moment to reflect on that question together. What is a way that your family has actually experienced a positive change during this period? What is something that's come because of the circumstances that we faced? What is everybody seeing? So let's see what people add in your chat. Please feel free to share some of your thoughts It might be just something small. So more family time, more time playing games and interacting with each other. Working from home and enjoying that. More family connectedness, connection between siblings, quality family rides, bike rides, dinner together every night at the dinner table as a family. More time for siblings to bond, less stress with the rush of the day, spending more quality time with your partner, kids getting to sleep longer and relax. That's a great one. Allowing us to slow down and enjoy our family time and connection. Cooking together every night, perhaps. Less rush without youth sports. The garden looks great. I love that. And the weeds hate me. Great. So spending time outdoors, spending time planting. I love that. Thank you, everybody. So, oh, another person, the yard is amazing. It finally got amazing. So that's lovely. And the yard is a great metaphor for us. So I'm actually gonna talk to us now about that metaphor a little bit further. So I love this quote. So, and thank you for sharing these ways that you've seen your lives change in small and sometimes big and meaningful ways. And how can we take these perhaps small changes and make them more meaningful and transform them into larger changes, into lasting changes? Part of it is even noticing that happens. So thank you for noticing with me and sharing your experience, because I think it helps all of us reflect on our own experiences and maybe notice something we weren't paying attention to. So those subtle changes can really plant the seed for transformation. And this quote says, never be afraid of change. You may lose something good, but you may gain something even better. So I told you I want to use this planting metaphor, and I appreciate it's almost like I had people in the audience telling me about their gardens. And that's lovely, because I wanted to tell you a little bit about bamboo and use bamboo as our metaphor here. Bamboo provides a lovely and helpful metaphor as we think about how to create families and homes that have a strong foundation, but that can also be flexible to change and resilient to the strong winds that might blow around them and the storms that come. So a few facts about bamboos, and I'm not a bamboo expert, but I love learning about bamboo because it takes 5 years for a bamboo tree to emerge from the ground. That means that all this foundational work is happening for years underground where we can't see it. They're growing that whole time, but it's all a foundation for what's to come. And that's what we want to think about with our families. What is that root system that we're setting up? What is the foundation that we're creating so that when we are out of crisis and when we have time to grow and flourish, that growth and flourishing will come easily, right? That we're all set for that. So what happens with bamboo is that it takes those 5 years, and then suddenly in 5 weeks, they can grow up to 80 feet. That means you could practically sit next to a bamboo tree that's emerging out of the soil and actually visibly see it rise from the ground. It's pretty incredible. Some species can grow up to 3 feet in a day. If you are really excited about this part of the presentation, I invite you to go to YouTube and watch a time lapse of a bamboo tree growing. It's pretty fun to watch. Maybe show your children. So let's start there with the metaphor. So nurturing resilience in yourself and your family might mean that establishing that same kind of strong foundation. It doesn't happen overnight. It means that you want to think about your daily practices. So what you do each day matters, even if it's small, especially if it becomes your routine. So stop for a moment and reflect. What are your routines right now? What are some things that you do every day, even if it's just for a few minutes with your family? So most of us probably, hopefully, brush our teeth every day. It only takes a few minutes. It doesn't have to be something that you make so difficult for yourself. You can't possibly create that into a routine. So you want to think about what some of those routines that you have with your children. And I invite you to take that piece of paper now and write a few thoughts down on your piece of paper about your routine with your children. Perhaps the ones you have right now, and perhaps some of the ones you want. And we'll get back to some ideas at the moment and add to this list. So let me go back to the bamboo for a moment. It has this strong foundation, which takes a lot of time, but then growth can come very quickly after that. It moves in the wind when there's a storm, so it sways and it can bend and sway, but it doesn't break. So we want to think about how our families can sway and bend with the current stress and storm around us, and what some ways are to stay flexible and strong. So in fact, bamboo survives disasters. It reappears after extreme conditions. And not only that, it helps to repair the damaged soil around it. It releases 30% more oxygen in the atmosphere and absorbs more carbon dioxide than other plants, which helps to offset carbon emissions. And it's good for our planet. In fact, many leading climate scientists are recommending that we plant more bamboo. So those of you in your gardens, I recommend it as therapeutic for yourself and for your planet as well, although it's going to take 5 years. So how might you think about what part you and your family are playing to impact the world around you? And in doing so, experiencing the immense benefits for yourself. So I want to think about this as a metaphor for us. So you want to think about the ways that you might plant seeds and water and nourish and grow resilience in your family. So in the chat, I want you to write and share your ideas, and on your piece of paper, some of the plans that you might have in 7 areas that I'm going to now show you that are drawn from psychological science and are going to highlight areas related to resilience. So I thought I'd use a tree graphic, of course, to highlight these areas. And you can see we'll start with the roots. So building with these roots, the roots are really that critical component of developing a strong foundation. It takes time and it takes commitment to making these a day-to-day practice. Roots need your daily attention to nourish that soil and take hold and thrive, right? So let's start with words. Words can be those that are around affirmation and reassurance. So you might just be using words of affirmation throughout the day. An easy one is, I love you. Our family is strong. And I want you to add some of your affirmation words and reassuring words in the chat so that we can share together. We are going through this together. Everything's going to be okay. I'm grateful for our time together. Thank you for that one. Everything is easier when you're calm. Maybe when we're calm together. This is only temporary, and maybe adding to that, it's going to get better. Children really need to hear that reassurance from the adults. And I would invite you to think about that, because we are struggling with our own reassurance. Who's reassuring us? You know, sometimes you wake up and you think, am I really the adult here? Where's the grown-up telling me it's going to be okay, right? But for our children, we really need to have that strength to tell them, even when we're not sure, that things are going to be okay. So this is temporary. We're going through a hard time, but we're going to get through it together. And growth comes from challenge. Thank you for that one. Great. So patience is part of those words of affirmation and reassurance. We have to reassure the adults in our lives too, not just the children, our partners. Those reassuring words, those affirmations, those reminders of I'm dedicated to our family, I'm here for you, we're here for each other, are very important to every single member of the family, no matter what your family configuration is like. You might want to also recognize that you are seeing changes in your children's behavior and mood, right? And thank you for adding, you are capable and strong. to the chat. That's a lovely one. And especially when we are seeing some of these changes in behavior and mood, we can think back to that cat hair that is in our children's space, right? And that their play is being disrupted, their innocence, their joy is being disrupted. And so we're going to really come back to that patience in ourselves and to provide that affirmation reassurance. I know that there's a lot of changes right now, and you miss your friends and your teachers and your school and your sports and the things you used to do, right? So you've written down a lovely list to guide yourself and guide each other. Maybe write one down on your piece of paper that
A
you can
veces en un
daily
pedazo de papel o en el chat.
We're just switching over. We're also doing this in Spanish, and I thank our interpreters.
Pues estamos cambiando entre los intérpretes de español.
So going back to our roots, the second one besides words was actions. So these are the healthy habits and rituals that your children can count on happening. And really, again, everything that I say for your children is really something you want to count on yourself. Your family wants to count on happening. Let's think about things that you can do daily. What are some actions that provide normalcy? And by providing normalcy, it provides reassurance. And many of you already mentioned some of those positives that you're doing. So it might be cooking together, as somebody already wrote, cooking a healthy meal together, even better. Maybe one that your child selected, even more exciting. Taking a walk outside, going for bike rides, people mentioned that. Perhaps sitting outside at night and looking at the stars, reading books together. You don't have to do any of these activities for long. Maybe it's just the act of a good night ritual that you do as a reliable good night ritual, something that you can take hold of. I know a lot of us are at the end of our bandwidth and we feel like we can't add one more thing. So it has to be something doable, something accessible. Perhaps it's saying a prayer together. Talking about 3 good things from the day, 3 things that you're grateful for that happened at the end of your day as a bedtime ritual is one that has shown in research. It doesn't have to be a bedtime ritual, but just doing that practice of 3 good things and why did they happen that way? Why was it good? Doing that with your children and doing that for yourself can last and lead to a really lasting positive feelings and happiness. And they've done that research longitudinally and found that. It's very simple activities. Exercise is also one that we find over and over again increases and uplifts our moods. So that's something that you're doing together. It's also very effective. You're getting as many benefits out of it as you are giving your children. So write down on your piece of paper an action that you might start doing today. And if anybody has an idea of one that I haven't listed yet, please feel free to add it to the chat. You've all given some really wonderful, Andrew Wiles' 4-7-8 breathing exercise, which is that you inhale for 4 seconds, you hold, I believe, for 7 seconds, and then you exhale for 8 seconds. Breathing and mindfulness practice and doing this with your children. In fact, I invite you to ask your children about the mindfulness and breathing activities they might have done at school. I do a lot of this work with children. I do the research, and my own kids still teach me every day about things that they're learning and a new way to do it in a way that makes sense to them. And then I just do it the way that they like doing it. So that's something that you can definitely begin. Heart meditations, that's another one. Wonderful, thank you. And then the third part of that root system, so we did words and actions, are connections. So you're already together a lot, and perhaps at times that's part of the stress. We're all together a lot. So what we want to think about is the quality of our togetherness, right? So for a moment, write down some ways you can connect and engage in a more whole way without distractions, where you can be present with your family members and not overwhelmed with the news and the stressors of the day. These might be asking your child to do a journal project with you, complete a sentence a day book with you. These are $10 items you can order from Amazon. It just gives you a daily sentence that you can complete together. But it invites maybe a more deeper dialogue. There's parent-child journals that ask each of you a question, so you can fill those kinds of things out if you want a guide for this, and it can be fun for your child to feel like they're doing a special book with you. It can be games. People mentioned doing games. Family reading time, thank you for that note on the chat. Storytelling, try something different. Turning out the lights, pretend that your lights went out, turn on a candle, and then tell jokes and stories one night. Something that you haven't done perhaps in a long while, or you don't do unless you're out camping. Throwing in some ways to change it up. I think as much as the normalcy and the routine is quite important right now, it's also important to keep things interesting and stimulating, right, for ourselves and for our children, especially since we've been quarantined and at home and maybe going a little stir crazy. So it's nice to think of new ideas. So if other people want to add some of those other ways to connect more deeply with you and your children and your spouse, please add them to the chat. And I'd like to also mention here that connecting with yourself and your circle and network of people that you can find social support from is really crucial. So it's a good start here where we can connect with one another, even as people who aren't seeing each other and don't necessarily even know each other. You can still see that here we are connecting, right? And feeling like there's a community of other people going through it and who we can share ideas with. And so please take that initiative to create that in your own world. A lot of times we wait, we think, oh, why hasn't this friend reached out to me? And we don't think, oh, I should reach out. How can I be the one to take initiative and create a little more connection with friendship circles? It's really important to have parent friends and people who are going through similar kinds of things that you are. So write down on your own personal piece of paper someone you could take the initiative to reach out to today. Family talent show, thank you for that addition. I love that. So I'm going to go back to our tree for a moment so we can look at that. We've now created these roots, words, actions, and connections that are daily. And it's time to think about our growth areas. So I want to consider preparation and continual nourishment for your family. So these are two areas, and these are ones that you can focus on ways to plan and prepare for the future. As I mentioned earlier, we've been so reactive instead of proactive because we've had to be. But let's take that pause, take that breath, and think about what are some realistic preparations that will actually make us feel more safe, more calm, more ready. What did this crisis invite us to worry about? But now that we have those worries, let's do something about it. How can we create not only our actual emergency preparation kit with the water and unfortunately all the stock of toilet paper everybody has hoarded, but what are ways that we can be more emotionally prepared as well? And some of that is just pragmatic of creating those networks of who to call, realizing, do I know my neighbors? And realizing, let me take that time to get to know my neighbors. Putting some phone numbers on the refrigerator for your children, talking about safety and planning with your children, thinking about ways that you can be more connected and more prepared. So perhaps put on your own personal piece of paper a step that you can take this week in that direction, and chat some ideas down. Write one down, a plan that you could follow through on. And maybe this is a piece that comes over time because, as I said, we can't do all of this at once. And what I'd rather have you do is establish that foundation and really concentrate on those words and actions and connection. And over time, be developing the trunk of your tree and the leaves and the flowers and the fruit. So nourishment has to do with all the extras that your child needs to flourish and thrive and to grow their trunks. They need to have adequate stimulation and a positive place for their energy to be directed. And especially as we're here about to launch into summer, you want to think about what activities you can put into place for your child to help nourish their minds and creativity and imaginations and to enrich that soil. So let's chat some ideas there. Our community can help us find some of these places for nourishment. Are there ideas that people are having? So we have our neighborhood has started a puzzle swap. I do puzzles with my children. We talk about a variety of topics while searching for that special piece. I love that. So that entails the quality connection you're having with your child. It entails going deeper, doing an activity and keeping things stimulating. And it also adds that connection with outside people and others, right? So that's a really creative, wonderful idea and a way to connect. So please feel free to add some other ideas there as you think about ways that you could maybe...
Añadan en el chat otras ideas si tienen ideas en propósito.
To maybe set up a collective with other parents to take turn in sharing your gifts in some way with each other's children. Could just be with one other family that you set up this collective. It might be with a few children and families from your child's classroom. So much is virtual right now, so we have to balance the electronic dosages of stimulation with the tactile stimulation. So what are some things your children can touch or learn or do over the summer that are more hands-on that you could guide them in or find ways to help them get guided in? You can kind of balance out that electronic time with there's a lot of learning to be done online. So that's something that you can access online and YouTube videos. Children actually enjoy watching and learning a new skill. So perhaps some of the gardening that you're doing, can you all learn about planting together more, creating imagination? Somebody wrote that we're participating in our community car parade and kids love to decorate the car. That's a lovely idea. Follow your child's interest and be guided by them. So write down one way that you might nourish. And then finally, at the tops of the tree, we had meaning and purpose. And those have to do with the highest levels of resilience building. So with meaning, you might have a conversation with your family about why things happen and articulate your belief system with them. In terms of purpose, you might take time to be intentional and thoughtful about finding your contribution to the world. So thinking together, stepping outside of your own personal stress for a moment can actually help you lower your stress. Thinking about other people who are maybe experiencing greater suffering than what you're experiencing. When you think of those 3 things that you're grateful for after the worst possible day, it helps you realize like you might have to go down to things that didn't go wrong that could have gone wrong, but that's okay. It's a starting place, right? And as you think about the outside world and realize the gratitude you have for the things that you do have, it helps you consider what's your purpose, what's your contribution, and it can counter a sense of helplessness. It doesn't have to be massive. It can be very doable. And often the most meaningful acts are the ones that are just based on a single one-to-one connection. So let me share this one more time as we look at our tree and think about our meaning and purpose that we're developing up here on the leaves and the branches and perhaps the fruit that we're bearing. I love the Emerson quote, Ralph Waldo Emerson, who talks about leaving the world a bit better, whether by a healthy child, a garden patch, or a redeemed social condition, and to know that even one life has breathed easier because you have lived. This is to have succeeded. So perhaps you're just thinking about that one person that your family can help smile that day, leaving a kind note, doing a good deed, doing a random act of kindness together. And perhaps you're ready to take this a step further and engage in community service at a larger scale. So perhaps you know, as this end of the school year is coming, and even if you don't get it done by the last day of school, even in the next couple of weeks, if you write a gratitude letter to your child's teacher, you have your child write that gratitude letter and share it, or make a gratitude video and share it with that teacher. I promise that that would be such a gift for not only your teacher, it truly would be, but also for you and your child to do. So in the chat, let's share some ideas on ways that we might be able to create meaning and purpose. What are some activities that people could do and might want to do? And on your piece of paper, you might take one of these ideas and mull it over, right? Write it down, something that a step you might take towards engaging in meaning and purpose with your family. So these are some areas that come from research on resilience and don't cover everything, but as I said, this is a way of nourishing and creating a day-to-day plan for your family. Because over time, and as we've seen through quarantine, I've been laughing at myself of thinking we all should have taken a first day of quarantine photo and then a last day of quarantine photo. And it really would, you know, I don't know about the before and after photos and all of us with scraggly hair and looking really stressed out. And so we can laugh at ourselves, but we recognize, right, in this time that it's those daily routines that help us through the challenging periods. And thank you for these suggestions. So responsibilities around the house and engaging your children in having purpose and meaning in the home, right, as part of the family, as one of the family members who has an important role. Talking about current events and thinking about the history together. Perhaps that might be a summer thing to really read or watch videos and have those deeper discussions. Perhaps starting a book club for even younger children in elementary school and friends to connect. So I love that, and bringing in some of the current issues around racial inequality and really bringing home the issues that are going on around us. Writing letters to friends and grandparents, so connecting with extended family, perhaps more than you did before. And routines have really been helping. So applying schedules for kids, helping them focus on different things to do. So I hope that your sheet of paper now has lots of ideas to start with. And I'm going to pause here to take some questions. And then I have a list of tips and reminders for our very end, but we have a few minutes now. And please write your questions in the chat. And if we don't get to your questions right now, which we might, but you can still also ask some questions that we can answer after this is over. And somebody mentioned staying connected to activities that your child has been in. So Girl Scouts in this case, but perhaps your child had peer groups and activities that they were involved in before. And so this person's daughter is going through a virtual camp through the Girl Scouts. And if you don't see those things happening, perhaps initiating that and asking other parents, hey, we were doing this activity together. Do we want to get the kids together to do something that we can figure out during this time, like a book club or a virtual camp? So there's a question in the chat. There's so much that's happening on the news, and a lot of it has to do with scary topics. What do I say to my child when my child asks about what is going on? So it's a great question and an important one. We're going through so much these days, and we can't just ignore that and jump to, but what are 3 great things that happened today, right? We'd still want to do that gratitude practice. There's nothing wrong with that, and that's very important. Our children deserve a chance to live and thrive in a world that feels free and feels possible and has hope in it, right? So we don't want them to be cumbered down by the negative things that are happening. We want them to learn about important parts of history and important parts of the present day, to be the leaders of our future. But we also can't place all of that on their shoulders on a day-to-day basis either, right? So it's quite a balancing act that we have as adults. It depends on the child's age, of course. And so I would start with asking your child what they understand of what's going on, to understand what they've heard, what they think is happening. So I would first start by turning that question around a little bit so that you know a little bit more about where your child is at, and you can help them navigate what's going on, what they've heard as rumor, or what's true. And I think acknowledging that, yeah, some very scary things have been happening, and having that conversation at a developmentally appropriate level is important. So somebody wrote, our newest stressor has been returning to normal. Some families are less mindful.
Pregunta ha dicho que nuestro nivel de estrés ahora es normal.
Some families are less mindful of masks and distancing.
Algunas familias no se importan con las máscaras.
And how do we keep our relationships with other families intact while supporting public health? And my wife is a healthcare worker. Thank you for that important question. My heart is with all of my friends and families who have healthcare workers in their families, and the additional levels of stress that people who have been essential or frontline workers during this time have gone through as families. It is a difficulty to figure out how to navigate the return to normal. And I think, that's a great question of how to keep relationships. If possible, to be honest about, the concerns that you have, and saying, we want to reconnect with you, but we also still need to be very cautious. You have a good reason, having a partner who's a healthcare worker, to be especially cautious. And thinking through, perhaps the first thing is to think through as a family what everybody's comfortable with and what you do want to do. What kinds of activities are okay with your family, and some of it is following national and international guidelines, and some of it is just making decisions for yourself about what you're comfortable with and who you're comfortable with doing those activities. So some people are maybe finding a middle road of choosing one or two families that those are the only families that they do special activities with, so that they know that those families are also have chosen them. You're together in it, and not sharing germs with other families. So finding maybe some creative solutions around that. And then if you're truly not ready at all, and you just want to continue the virtual path, then continuing to do the Zoom dates with friends, as children have been doing, and finding ways to stay connected, Zoom happy hours for the parent level. And, I know a lot of families are doing game nights now over Zoom or other virtual ways of doing that. So perhaps just continuing to try to reach out in those ways. So somebody wrote, in these unprecedented times, how best can parents allow their children to build resiliency while showing them we care strongly about their well-being and want to proactively head off self-implosive depression and anxiety? So, really all these 7 areas that I talked about today are the ways that I think you are great starting points. It's not all of it, but it is a great starting point and a wonderful foundation for you. I think those things at the roots, the words and the actions, and especially the connection, have been shown time and time again. Social support, feeling connected, not feeling isolated, is is always a central predictor of mental health and reducing any chance or preventing depression and anxiety and any other mental health problems. So I think that has been one of the biggest challenges of this time, and relates to that last question about that isolation and wanting to return to normalcy and still having concerns and needing to be cautious. So finding other ways to stay connected virtually and taking the time to do that is really kind of your nourishment, right? The nourishment that your soil needs for even though we might be underground right now, for us, when we come out of this, to be able to shoot back up and to grow. So I thank you all for your time today that you spent. It is already an action that you did to take the time to talk about and think about and reflect upon your family's resilience. We will be posting the webinar and online on our GGSE UCSB website. A link is going to follow in the chat. You can also continue to ask questions on the chat right now, and I will follow up with answers over social media. So you can follow me at Dr. Kia-Keating. You can follow our GGSE Twitter and Instagram pages, and I invite you to continue that conversation with us. So thank you all for your time today.
Dr. Kia-Keating, thank you for your time today. We appreciate you sharing your expertise and those helpful tips, and you've definitely helped us ease our heavier loads a little bit, as much as you can in an hour. For all of you out there on Zoom, thank you for being here with us. We appreciate your participation. There will be one more talk in this series, and I don't know if we have the slide for that. I hope we do. It will be next week on Thursday at 6 p.m. with Erica Felix. I do want to share a few closing thoughts and then leave you with a poll to wrap things up. The webinar was recorded and will be available to revisit on the Gevirtz School's webinar landing page, which we just shared the link for, and our YouTube channel, so you can look for it there. In fact, you can see last week's talk by Jason Duque is already posted in the Spanish version, and the English will also be up very soon. And we'll drop those links into the chat for you. I see people are doing that. Thank you. We do have our little poll there. Was the webinar helpful? Did you have any technical difficulty? And where did you hear about this webinar? If you could answer those as I sum up here. We will be sending up a follow-up email in the next few days to share a short list of recommendations and resources that Dr. Kia-Keating shared during this talk, so keep your eyes on your inbox. We'll also be doing a social media follow-up posts about the webinar, as Maryam said, so that would be a great place for you to ask any other questions, because we do monitor our social media quite closely. If you don't already, please follow us on social media. We're dropping those links into the chat: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. We're not doing TikTok or any of those yet, but we're on the other ones. If you have a question for somebody specific at the Gevirtz School, you can find all of our contact information just on the overall Gevirtz School website, which is just education.ucsb.edu. So please work on that last poll. It seems like many of you have. We'll leave it open for a little bit. After the poll, if you have any ideas burning in your mind, you can drop them in the chat and we will get them to them eventually. And more than anything, thank you. Thank you for being here. Our work in the Gevirtz School is built around improving educational and mental health outcomes for the folks in our community, region, and state. So we are so happy to have had this opportunity to share with you, and we look forward to having you at our next webinar. Until then, be well.